Good morning. My name is Bryce Perry, and along with my co-president Margaret Mary Fitzgerald, we'd like to welcome you to the League of Women Voters of Fairfield's 2020 Legislative Forum. Many of you have attended our legislative forums before. This is a great opportunity for our legislators to look ahead at the upcoming session, discuss what they feel are key issues, and what challenges they may expect. I'd like to thank today's participants, State Representatives Laura Devlin, Brian Farnen, and Cristin McCarthy Vehey, as well as State Senator Tony Hwang. We appreciate very much that you made this forum a priority in your busy schedules. I would also like to thank Fairfield University for offering the Devlin School of Business as this forum's venue. It's pretty impressive. I'm loving it. We look forward to many interesting and informative collaborations with Fairfield University in the future. Particular thanks to Ann Flanagan and Barbara Thumb for their efforts in organizing this event. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization of women and men that is dedicated to increasing information, education, and participation in all things political. The legislative forum we are hosting today is one of our best opportunities to highlight issues that directly affect you, your family, and your community. Today's forum is divided into 3 segments. First, we will have a brief presentation by each of our legislators regarding what they think will be the biggest issues in the 2020 session. Second, I will ask for comments regarding 2 topics the League of Women Voters Public Issues team considers priorities: election administration reform and voter protection. Last, but certainly not least, we encourage questions from the audience. We've purposely limited the time allotted for answering questions in the first 2 sections so that we can ensure we have plenty of time to hear from you. To begin, I ask that each of you spend 2 to 3 minutes addressing what you see to be priority issues for the upcoming session. And Laura, we'll start with you.
Great, thank you. And congratulations on the League's 100th anniversary.
Thank you
for having us here, and thank you for everybody who has taken time this morning to join us. So I am Laura Devlin, representing the 134th District, which is parts of Fairfield and parts of Trumbull. I serve as the ranking member on the Transportation Committee. I also serve on the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee and the Transportation Bonding Committee, and also on the Education Committee. So for me, probably, I guess I would characterize it as 2 things that are going to be the biggest issues for this session, potentially before this session, because we know that the governor and the majority are trying to push a toll bill before we go into session next Wednesday. So certainly transportation funding is a big thing, and I'm happy to talk in further about that, but for the sake of our time, I'll just kind of continue. The other is some of the policies that have been pushed on our state in the last legislative session, which honestly was the least friendly business legislative session that we have ever had, or one of. And there are lots of sound good, feel good pieces of legislation, but the impact of their implementation is significant and isn't really thought through. So I'll use one example, which is the minimum wage bill that was passed. I know it is a very popular concept. However, it is one of the most generous minimum wage increases, particularly because after it reaches $15 an hour, it will continue to increase with the cost of living adjustment. In a healthy economy, in a thriving, growing state, potentially it might be a good thing to do. But if we had that kind of economy, we would also have competitiveness in a job market that would cause companies to have to offer higher wages. So we've imposed this on companies. We were with the Connecticut Southwest Council on Aging, and they talked about the impact of this bill on Medicare reimbursement, that right now they're losing 4%. When the increase goes in again in October, they're going to lose another 6%, which means they're asking the state and taxpayers to pay more because of the impact of minimum wage increase. The response at that discussion from legislators who supported that was kind of shocking to me, because it's like, oh, that was in the past. We can't look back. We just need to look forward. What I think is our job as legislators is to first do no harm. And we have got to think through the implementation of legislation. We've got to understand the impact before it goes forward. So for me, the 2 biggest things are our transportation infrastructure funding, which hopefully we will not do before the session goes in next Wednesday. and we will do in the legislative session properly, and also the impact of legislation, again, being pushed by a significant majority that is having some significant impact on the ability of our state to recover.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian?
Yes, well, thank you so much, League of Women Voters, for having us all here today. And so I just got sworn in on Wednesday, so I'll give you a little bit of a, thank you so much, a little bit of an introduction. I'm Brian Farnen. I grew up in Connecticut. I am really excited to get to work for you, and I really want to be part of the Connecticut comeback. I do think our state is hurting. It has a lot going for it. We have one of the most educated workforce. We have a culture of innovation and ingenuity in the state. But we also have some real struggles. And I think it's important because I feel like we get really down on the state. I also want to, if we're going to do that, I think we should also talk about the positives too, because, you know, there's pluses and minuses, obviously, with our state. But, you know, 6 years of people moving out, we see it in our home values. We see that our state is hurting. So, you know, first and foremost, I'm running because I want to be part of the solution to turn this state around. I lobbied really hard to be on 3 committees, and I believe that's going to get announced early next week. The Finance, Revenue, and Bond Committee, the Transportation Committee, and the Education Committee. All 3 areas are areas that I hold near and dear for myself, and I also feel are very important for the district in this state. From a Finance Committee perspective, I'm going to look to fight any new attempts for new taxes. I think in this state we have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. You look at, you know, working families, those on a fixed income. There's an affordability issue in Connecticut, so that will be where I'll be focused. I also think, as Brenda was mentioning, we have an issue right now with a high level of a regulatory burden in the state of Connecticut. There's been somewhat of a piecemeal approach to trying to lessen that regulatory burden. I'm going to work to bring forth legislation. I met with my legislative staff this week trying to get ahead of it, get to work early, to try to bring forward kind of a larger piece of regulatory reform that can minimize the regulatory burden, especially on small businesses. The Transportation Committee, I'm sure we'll get questions on tolls. The good thing is Republicans and Democrats can all agree that infrastructure has been underfunded for many, many, many years. So I really want to focus on, you know, getting infrastructure dollars spent now, especially prioritizing Fairfield County, trains to New York City, and also 95 in the Merit. The way I look at it is we are the economic engine for the state, Fairfield County. And for every dollar that we give to Hartford, we're getting pennies back. So if they want us to be the economic engine for the state, they need to give us the tools to succeed. Now, I'm sure that's going to get to the toll question, and we can talk about that when those questions come up. I don't think that's the answer until we get our economic house in order, but I'm sure we'll talk more about that. And then the Education Committee. On the RTM, I was on the Education Committee since I was on the RTM. I have 2 kids in public school. I'm executive member of our PTA. It's something that I hold near and dear to our heart. When you look at the state funding that's coming into Connecticut, coming into Fairfield, every year it seems to be less and less, and there's additional top-down mandates that are coming away. Even the leader of the state senate is talking about things like forced regionalization. I think those are things that we need to really fight to control our local control of our education system, and that's really why I want to be on that committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Cristin?
Good morning, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here with the League and here at Fairfield University in the heart of the 133rd District, so it's great to be here. I think, you know, the question of biggest issues versus most important issues, sometimes the biggest issues are the ones that take up a lot of time and conversation, and sometimes those are the same things and sometimes they're different. I would agree that transportation funding and how we fund infrastructure, whether it be tolls or through other means, that will be and continues to be the biggest conversation, and I think one of the most important for us. I think there will be some other big conversations that will come up and will take a lot of time, but from a priority standpoint, I think we do need to continue to look at how we're supporting and developing and empowering our workforce and also improving our economy in terms of jobs. We have to look at the transportation infrastructure as part of that. It's a critical piece of it. We've got to make sure we've got a diverse, affordable housing stock for our employees to be able to live and to get to work in a reasonable time frame. We've got to continue to strengthen the economic development efforts that the governor has started with some changes at CERC and the Department of Economic and Community Development in terms of building relationships with our business community and businesses of all sizes, small, large, and everyone in between. And we have to look at how we are zoning. And I serve on 3 committees. I'm on Transportation, Government Administration, and Elections, and I co-chair the Planning and Development Committee of our state. And as I dive more into those issues, I understand the importance of zoning for economic development for our state and placemaking and how we help to thrive. From education is a critical piece of what we do every session, and certainly at the local level, this is core to our property values and to our future, educating our citizenry. Looking at funding and how we address special education funding is an ongoing priority. I have a meeting set next week to talk to some folks. I met last week with the head of our RESC, which is our regional service organization. We've got to talk about attention to students' basic needs, health, housing, but also social emotional learning, which is one of the priorities that the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education has talked about, because if students can't focus and can't be able to stay in the classroom, they're certainly not going to be able to learn. And with education, we have to look at excellence and accountability, but we also have to look at access and equity. I know we will continue to focus on caring for our seniors. We've got to make sure that we maintain what we're doing in terms of the tax exemptions for Social Security income. We need to protect the Medicare Savings Program. We know we've had struggles with that in the past. And also aging in place dollars, which really allow seniors to stay in their homes and helps in terms of dignity, but also in terms of economics. And finally, I am the new co-chair of the Coastal Caucus, which has continued to shed light on, along with other committees that we work on, the standing committees of the legislature, but the issues around resiliency and climate change, which are so real, and especially in light of some of the policies coming out of Washington and the White House, it becomes even more important for us as state-level leaders to address these issues at the state and local level. I spent some time with our amazing flood and erosion control board this week, and they are a group of very dedicated and very impressive volunteers from multiple backgrounds. But they're volunteers working at the municipal level, trying to address alone the issues that we're facing even as a single community is not going to work. We are going to have to do much more at the state level to help make sure that we are putting in place zoning policies and that we are putting in place environmental policies and economic policies that will help us with these issues. So these are some of the many priorities that we're going to be facing this session.
Thank you. Tony.
I'm State Senator Tony Hwang. Again, for all 4 of us, thank you to the League. But also, I think it's important to recognize the forum that you provide for people in the community to interact and not simply do it on the social media waves. So it's a welcome exercise, so thank you. And I don't want to neglect the fact that you are celebrating your 100th anniversary in existence, which coincides.
We've aged well.
You all age beautifully. And it is no coincidence that it coincides with the 100th year of the 19th Amendment, women's suffrage and ability to vote, which is not lost on what the value of this country is about. But being said, I think if you want to look at priorities, I think the focus has to be for us as representatives. For me, representing 5 towns, our priorities have to go from the grassroots up in recognizing the importance of representing our community up in Hartford and taking a look at issues as it impacts not only the whole state, but also how it impacts our community and the residents that we represent. I think as I look at some of the challenges we have in the town of Fairfield, for me up in Hartford, the priorities on a local level would be to take a look at how municipal funding, as it relates to education, as well as currently holding back of the low-set funding for our roads, paving, and all that. I think it's important for us to advocate for the community in regards to municipal impact of our state government's budgeting process. Number 2, I think we've all had our fill in regards to the contaminated landfill issue, but now the aftermath is really the cleanup. And you have my commitment and my support to the town leaders that whatever needs to be done on a state level and my urging on the federal level, we will work toward that in regards to money and clarity on that issue. I think education, there is no bigger reason why I run for office. It was due to 15 years ago when our children were impacted by redistricting. Education remains the fundamental focus in regards to the quality of life in our community. And ultimately, I've served on the Housing Committee and was the co-chair for the past number of years. I'm now the ranking member. The ability to have a coherent, comprehensive, affordable housing plan. There is a dramatic need for affordable housing throughout this entire state. But I have to believe that it can be a better plan in a collaborative manner of inputs from our local community, our local zoning boards, as well as the affordable housing entities that is looking to create opportunities for housing. For me, it's absolutely critical. Housing is fundamental. I know that better than anybody else as an immigrant coming in this country. I spent my formative years in a federal housing project, and it was an important foundation for us to succeed. But I believe the current process needs to be fixed, and so I'm excited to be a part of that as a member of the Housing Committee. So on a local level, these are important things that you hear a lot about. On a state level, I will say it's about jobs and businesses. You know, what's remarkable is in December, the Department of Labor reported that the state of Connecticut had a growth of 100 jobs gained. That is a stunning reminder of how far we still need to go in building our business and jobs. And it's not rhetoric. It's not just about, you know, how I can do things better. It's being down in the trenches as legislators implementing policy. As Cristin said, that is critical for what we have to do to improve quality of life and the economic sustainability of our state. I can share with you the things that I have undertaken in regards to that, particularly in regards to being chosen by the governor to be part of a workforce skills development council, which encompasses 24 members of business leaders, education leaders. I'm one of 2 legislators in that council, and our focus is to create workforce skill development that cuts across all the silos of Department of Labor, economic development, higher education. The executive order by the governor was to take a look at creating a supply of skills to meet the business growth that we need in our state. Another issue that I've been focused on is I am the co-chair of a bipartisan bioscience caucus. Now, we have strengths in this state in regards to financial services, advanced manufacturing, military defense, but I truly believe that in order to compete in the 22nd century, we need to develop new sectors of industry that will allow us to compete globally. So 2 sectors that I've been very actively involved in is, as I said, the bioscience initiative. Another area is to take a look at cybersecurity and digital technology in our state. We have been working, we've been blessed in this community to have 3 great colleges in the area: Fairfield University, Sacred Heart University, and University Bridgeport. Along with that collaboration, I think we can be a real fulcrum for dynamic change in industry and entrepreneurialism in our area. We need to tap it. And one thing I know that we did last year was an accomplishment was to remove the shackles of innovation from our universities. We allowed, rather than to have curriculum development review through a lengthy time cycle, we've allowed our universities to be able to unleash their innovation and entrepreneurialism in designing new curriculums. I'm excited about that. So the beauty of that is we, as legislators up here, Democrats and Republicans, work every day to try to create solutions. We may disagree about that, but make no doubt about it. We're working on behalf of you. We may agree to disagree, but Democrats and Republicans, people who have been willing to serve, not only on a state level, but also on a local level, should be heralded as people that believe in their community. So thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to ask 2 questions of the panel here. The first is on election administration reform. And we're going to move and start with you, Brian, and then we'll, just to
new
let
guy.
you know, yeah. And as initiation, you have to sing the Star Spangled Banner.
Kristen's only had her big donuts.
All right. Which of the following election administration reforms are you most likely to support in the 2020 short session, and why? Automatic voter registration, strengthening absentee voting procedures, or funding for replacement of voting machines?
I think our voting machines is a problem. If you look what happened in New Haven and Hartford, for example, and Bridgeport, they really did a disservice to the voters in those urban communities by the fact that you hear 2 hours lines to vote for presidential elections. That's just not acceptable. People should be able to go and be able to vote and not have to worry about running out of ballots, the machine's not working, jamming. People cannot put 2-3 hours aside in their day to come out and vote. They should be able to do that in a manner. So that would be my focus, because I think right now we have an operational problem that needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Cristin?
So the League was one of the first groups I joined when I moved to Fairfield. So these questions are obviously one that would excite me, and also serving on the General Government Administration and Elections Committee. I do believe we need to codify automatic voter registration. So it's been put into place through the Secretary of the State's office, and I think we should codify that into law so that we are helping to assure that process. In terms of absentee ballot voting procedures, I think we need to simplify and strengthen. So right now, I'm sure that most of you here know that if you want to fill out an absentee ballot, you have to fill out an application that has to be signed and sent in with your original signature by mail. And then it has to be, then the ballot is mailed to you, and then you return the ballot. So if you haven't planned ahead well enough, like someone I know who's currently living abroad and had trouble voting in this special election because of that. I know there are some senators who are interested in looking at the ability to at least apply online for the absentee ballot and then, of course, receive the ballot in the mail. I will say also that in terms of absentee ballots, I lived in Washington State when my husband was in the military. There was no excuse absentee balloting. The ballot was mailed at home. There are a number of states now that have vote at home initiatives, and I'm interested in helping to work to change our process here in Connecticut so that people will be able to opt out of their ballot as opposed to having to opt in. Voter participation rates have skyrocketed in those places. And then in terms of voting machines, I don't know if anyone heard the NPR piece yesterday from New Hampshire. Anyone hear that piece? Yep, I see a couple head nods. It was an interesting piece and also fun for me because the state senator who is quoted as someone I'm part of a leadership network with, and the Secretary of the State in New Hampshire apparently held up a pencil. I have a pen, and he said, "How do you hack this?" Right? They were talking about their paper ballots and using paper ballots. I think at this point in time, it's really important that we maintain our paper backup, but we also need to make sure that our machines are secure. And it's not just about the machines, it's about how the way we administer elections as individual communities, as opposed to in some other states where it's a county-wide system. So individual communities who are then perhaps subject to ransomware attacks or to, things that they may not, that we as a town or other cities may not have the means, ability, or technical capabilities to deal with. We're fortunate here in Fairfield, but we've got to do whatever we can to make sure that the vote is secure. And that means we need to make sure that we're investing in the proper technology, but that we're also investing in the pieces around it that will provide the security we need.
Thank you. Tony?
Can you repeat the three?
Yeah, absolutely. Automatic voter registration, strengthening absentee voting procedures, and funding for replacement of voting machines.
Okay. Well, as I said before, thank you to the League of Women Voters for advocating for the value and the importance of the one person, one vote. That being said, I am fully in support of looking at the advanced voter registration. What I struggle with is how it got implemented in the first place with the DMV. I am fully in support of codifying and having the legislature vote on this decision making. But unfortunately, I believe it was in 2015 or 2016, it was the Secretary of State through a memorandum of understanding with the DMV without any legislative approval that codified the automatic vote registration. It bypassed the legislative process. I'm very happy to see that this past session, we did actually have a vote in the House in regards to automatic vote registration. But the bill itself in the detail was comprehensive. It didn't only include being able to register automatically if you go to the DMV, but we looked at libraries. We looked at various other venues and universities, opening up a whole gamut in regards to automatic vote registration. Again, it had a deliberative legislative debate. That I applaud. And as a result, it didn't get through. But nonetheless, I would welcome a continual conversation of automatic vote registration in a transparent legislative process. Number two, we want to look at early voting. Well, early voting is part of our Constitution. It's part of restriction. I'm sure the League has advocated against that for many years. And I'm happy to report that through the education and the advocacy of the League, I have understood the importance, and most importantly, talking to constituents, particularly in southwestern Connecticut, that have such frantic lives, running to and from different locations at work, and not having the possibility to be able to get to the polls from 6 to 8. I actually was the lone Republican senator to actually support early voting initiatives as an amendment to the Constitution. But I'm also happy to report that the entire Fairfield delegation, Democrats and Republicans, supported the early voting initiative. So again, in Fairfield, it is not a Democrat-Republican issue. It is one we believe in representing our constituencies. In regards to the voting machine funding, it's interesting. I still am old enough in serving the past 12 years to remember we still had the lever machines. And it wasn't that long ago, following the Florida chat issue, that through the initiative of Secretary of State Denise Merrill, we went to the digital scanning. But the challenge was always, by federal statute, to require a track, a document that we can refer to in case of recounts. When you look at new machines, perhaps we can use better technology. That's always possible. But I believe if we were looking to invest money, I would hope that the Secretary of State would collaborate closer and more interactively with our various registered voters in our communities with additional training, and to be able to provide proper funds for election day proctors that will be able to be trained and have the latest details, so that when voters come and register and go to vote, that they get the latest and the best legal information that's available to them. So if I had to choose between machinery or better training for people that would be interacting, I would choose for the latter, of better training and interaction for that. But again, ultimately, when you look at early voting, I have been persuaded that it is important for people in our community to have an opportunity to access to vote. Because if you truly read the current early voting restrictions, there are only 5 reasons you're allowed to file an absentee ballot. That's too limiting in this current day and age. I think the other part that gets brought up when we talk about early voting is the real concern of absentee ballot fraud. And you used to be able to say that just didn't happen. But unfortunately, we saw it all too real by evidence of the Bridgeport mayoral primary, which literally said that the Supreme Court made the decision not to overturn it, but they did say there was significant evidence of wrongdoing. To us, one person, one vote is sacred. And we have to do all our part to ensure that that security is there. But we need to balance it with increasing voter participation and accounting for people's ability to get to the poll and have their voices be heard.
Thank you. Laura?
What's left to say? So
I know.
in concept, I can't see not getting behind any of these, but again, the devil's in the details of what's actually in the language of a bill, what's the implementation, et cetera. Let me kind of start in a reverse order. So first of all, we should do everything we can so that any individual who is eligible to vote has it. We're not hindering that it's easy for them to be able to do that. Also, it was, how many years ago? I had the privilege of serving as the moderator of elections for the town of Fairfield. And let me tell you, that was quite an educational system. And at the time then, I became the ranking member on the Government Administration Elections Committee. And that was an incredible advantage for me, having dealt with elections in every aspect at the ground level. So first of all, in terms of one of the things that I also learned during that time and was kind of surprised is that, so I'll use my corporate background as an example, in a corporate organization, your ground team, your sales force is the number one thing, right? Because they are going to deliver the revenue to the state, and they're your team out as the ambassadors to talk to everyone. For the Secretary of State, the town clerks and the registrar of voters are essentially her field team. And what I found was such lacking in terms of information being shared in a timely manner so that people could be appropriately trained, that there was conflicting information being given. So to Senator Hwang's point, I think it is so important that, it's always easy to go for the latest shiny object, really focus on ensuring that the people responsible for administering elections are trained properly. I would encourage any of you, if you have interest in getting involved, to volunteer with our registrars of voters, because it is also a challenge to find people who will be able and willing to work the polls. And let me tell you, especially that 6 a.m. shift where you have to be there at about 5 o'clock to get ready.
5:15. It was great.
Okay, my point exactly. I thought, and I could be wrong because I'm not on government administration and elections anymore, I thought we were getting federal funding that the Secretary of State was going to put towards new machines. I could be
That's
wrong.
part of the next question.
Gosh, jumping ahead. All right. So I know our machines are aging. So, and I'll be quite honest, I've lost track of sort of what their status is. But yes, they need to be replaced, we need to replace them. In terms of absentee voting, another thing that was very apparent in my experience has been not just some of the process, but the language. It's difficult to understand. To follow the instructions of what you're actually supposed to do. So absentees are tricky. It was in the House session when I was on GAE, and I remember there was a constituent emailing me while we were discussing one of these bills and challenging why was I talking about absentee ballot fraud. It doesn't exist. So I sent off about 5 citations that have been in our public press over the past few years, not even including the latest election in Bridgeport, but I think that was convincing because I never heard back. But I think that absentee ballots, I agree with, having been a commuter for 15 years on Metro North, having some increased ability, but at the same time, that is, if there's going to be voter fraud, what we have seen in the state of Connecticut is that's the biggest area where it happens. And I just think we need to be careful. I'm not necessarily opposed at all to automatic voter registration. What Senator Hwang brought up about the MOU is spot on. And that we're still dealing with DMV issues to ensure that they have made some strides. So I don't know if any of you have been to the DMV lately, but they are improving their service, no doubt. But I'm not 100% convinced that they have the capability to do all the things we want while they're still trying to get their core business going. So I'm not opposed to any of them. I'm not sure which one I'd pick as my number one. But again, it's the details that are important.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Similar question, but a little different. Connecticut was one of 21 states whose election systems were targeted in hacking efforts by Russian agents during the 2016 elections. The $5 million federal grant monies going to Connecticut are earmarked by the Secretary of State to help protect the state's voter file from hacking. What other ways can we reinforce voter security? Cristin, we'll start with you.
Thank you. So I was on my phone Googling just because I do remember recently Secretary Merrill and Senator Blumenthal just were doing some press around the issue. But I think I mentioned some of that in my earlier comments. I spoke actually this week with the Secretary of the State's office. They are looking at using some of those funds for personnel, because what Senator Hwang said is absolutely right. The machinery is important, but the people who are operating and securing the machinery, providing the training, et cetera, and I agree with Representative Devlin on that as well. We have to make sure that people are properly trained and that the systems are in place. And also that people know how to respond when they are receiving any threats. You know, it's a reality, the hacking process. Even if you talk with our local Board of Ed's IT director, it's a constant thing that is happening. So we need to make sure that we're doing that. But I think one of the other issues around security in elections is misinformation that's out there. And when you think about, you know, the federal dialogue, not that I really want to go there today, but it's part of what we're facing. And I think that the Secretary has a history of civics education. And you may wonder, how does that tie into this? But helping to educate on all levels, from how we're coding machines, how election officers are implementing the process, and a moderator, to what voters know and understand. And that needs to be addressed at every level. So we need to help make sure that people also have the skills and the tools available to know how to figure out what information is false and what information is not. Obviously, we have perspectives that vary, right? But there's also the risk of some of that false information out there. So we're going to have to attack this at all levels.
Thank you. Tony?
You know, hacking in elections, hacking in our general life is a point of epidemic concern. But we don't really realize it till it's happened. And so I think I applaud Secretary of State Merrill. I applaud our federal delegation for being able to get the funds to address this issue and bring it to the forefront. But nevertheless, we have to be much more conscious ourselves in regards to election and digital fraud and misinformation. What's even more critical than just simply hacking the election results is the unabated proliferation of misinformation. When you looked at the study and the research evident after the 2016 election, you saw that there were Russian influences, not simply at the ballot box. That's critical protection. But they had intentional influences of putting bots and surrogates to be able to plant divisive, polarizing, intentionally flagrant information targeted at audiences through the proliferation of our social media outputs. You know, what most people in our communities don't fully realize, that we have given up tremendous level of our own privacy when we subscribe to our social media communications. But what we don't realize when you talk about election input, and if you really read the report coming out, it was the real targeting of surrogates, planning divisive information to be able to supplement independent thought with divisive partisan thought. And I applaud, as I said earlier, in regards to the league and having these kind of forums, having these kind of engagements, because it's a real interaction. It's a face-to-face. But we have to be very conscious that when you look at hacking, it's not simply just the impact at the polls, which is critical, but it's how it influences our way of thinking. Because unfortunately, we live far too much of our lives off of this digit, off of this technology, and we've forgotten to engage in debate. Even though debate may be divisive, maybe debate can be emotional, but it's real. And we've moved far, far, far away from that. So when you talk about hacking, when you talk about concerns to our democracy, I think we have to be very cautious to not let our independent thought be influenced by divisive thoughts. If you've got questions, you've got concerns, talk to your legislators, talk to your community leaders directly.
Thank you. Laura?
So,
Aren't you happy you follow me?
Jesus. I am. All right, so tell me your question again.
We're at the League of Women Voters.
What day is it?
The $5 million federal
Ah.
grant monies are earmarked by the Secretary of
Right.
State to help protect the voter file.
Yep.
And what else would you do?
So I think, so one of the things to our advantage, and it was just a couple of years ago that there were complaints about our local voting machines because they were, out of date and it's old technology. Because I don't know if you're aware, but like each machine has its own little card. And then you take that card and you have to fill out this online database, which could be improved, let me tell you, something created out of the Secretary of State's office where you report the voting. But by having these machines, it does give us greater security because we also, as anyone's been a vote collector at the end of an election, right, we get the paper tab and that's where we have records of voting. And we get that when we have to tally and submit the votes. So it's not only ensuring that the voter file is secure, but when we talk about the DMV and automatic voter registration, what's the security of our overall systems? So I hope that we do some kind of forensic audit, if you will, of our IT capabilities and that security. Because the one thing, again, to our advantage is that the machines, they don't talk to each other and they're not connected anywhere. And while that was a bad thing, it's a good thing. But it really comes back to the overall security. I think that, and hopefully there's coordination with our new head of DAS and our IT folks who are very, very capable and good. It's a big upgrade for our state. So I hope that helps
Thank you.
answer. But
All right, Brian, bring it home.
All right. So a lot has been spoken about this topic. So
come on.
At Sikorsky Aircraft, I had the opportunity firsthand to see hacking by a foreign government, and it's scary. And we saw that numerous times with attempts by foreign governments, the Chinese, to get into our systems to take technology. I see it in my current job working for a quasi-public that's a financial institution with attempts to hack in. And we see it every day in our lives. It could be as simple as an email, a phishing scam. My sweet mother, like opening up a video thinking it's just a cute Ford, but in reality, it's an attempt to get all of her private information. So I think it really drives home the fact that we need to keep the paper trail. We need, as great as technology is, the good old-fashioned paper trail, old-fashioned system, I think works, and I think we need to stick for it so we can, protect our country from, these outside influences. And I do believe these outside influences don't just relate to the ability to potentially hack into a voter file. I think, these attempts to influence public opinion in the news are just as dangerous. And as Americans, we also need to do a better job to step out of our own echo chambers. Republicans only listening to Fox News and Democrats only listening to New York Times. Like, take a step back, talk to others, talk to each other, find other news outlets that maybe don't always align with what your thinking is, just to challenge yourself, because I feel like the more opinions we get from others and the more chances we have to talk to each other, I think it will protect our country as a whole from some of these more these attempts to potentially try to sway opinion, because I think it's easier to do it if people live with just one particular outlook without looking and talking to others from across the political spectrum. And then last, I did just want to add, as it relates to early voting, I am very much open to that. I also think there needs to be an education as it relates to absentee ballots. I don't think a lot of voters understand that, this whole process of you make the request, you mail it in, you get it back. It's a very onerous process. I think we need to educate voters in our town that if you can't be there on election day, you can go early, fill out the absentee ballot application that day, and just vote then. I don't believe, from my personal experience just doing an election, that a lot of people were aware of that. So that's something I think we should get out there to the public.
Thank you. All right, now we come to our favorite part of this forum, and that's your participation. I've not known you to be shy before, so I'm hoping that you're not shy today. If you have a question for any of our legislators, the microphone is right here, and if you come up and use that. Otherwise, I'll be forced to ask more questions.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Lived and worked in Fairfield since 1955. Happy to say my 93-year-old father's still living with us. And
Could you speak more into the mic,
I have
please?
to get back to him, so
Thanks.
that's why I want to ask the questions first, because he's home by himself. So I've had a business in Fairfield for 35 years. I'm a CPA, I'm a tax guy, and I work for small business. And Tony knows me. I worked on Dave Walker's campaign for governor, and Brenda nominated me to the Investment and Advisory Committee for the Retirement Committee for Connecticut, so I'm full aware of those problems. But the more insidious problem is when the media says there's no tax increase, and there's two big, major, important points coming up in 2020, forgetting about all the retroactive tax increases from the past. Number one, there's the 10% tax increase for the Family Medical Leave Act, which is going to start on July 1. Now, why do I say it's a 10% tax increase that nobody knows about? Every employee, not the employer, is going to have to pay that. Now, if you're in a tax bracket of 5%, simple math, it's 10% tax increase. It's just like a tax increase. It's coming out of your pocket. For people not to talk about it as a tax increase is fallacious, and nobody knows about it. The second one is, it was supposed to come out, and maybe Tony knows about this already, January 16th, actually the revenue commissioner resigned, but he was on a committee to determine whether, starting on January 1st, 2021, all employers, not state employers, all employers will pay the state income tax for their employees. Now, think about that. I'm an employer. I got 15 people working in my firm. I'm going to start paying for their income tax? Do you want to chase not only big business out of Connecticut, but small business? And nobody's talking about it. I don't even know, Tony, and maybe you do, if the commission issued their report on January 16th, what they were supposed to do. But two big draconian tax issues facing every one of us, and not a peep.
All right. Who would like to?
Is there an order? How do you want to handle
No,
this?
it's whoever you decide amongst yourselves.
If I may just simply, I know Michael Knight. Maybe if we can have the speakers cite their names and their
Very good.
residence just for record. But yes, Michael owns a small CPA firm, and he's been very active in communicating, and we've spoken many a times. He's offered different perspectives. But to fully answer that question, no, I don't think there has been an advisory. Nevertheless, I think this is a helpful input to make sure that we make that request. And I will preface my expectations in regards to this exchange. We start session on February 5th, and it is important to get feedback and concerns and the priorities that the community has for us to take back to Hartford. I reiterate what I said in the beginning. We have an important responsibility to represent our constituents in Fairfield, and for me, the 4 other towns that I represent. So this kind of input is important for us to hear loud and clear the concerns of our constituents locally and bring them up to Hartford, and not vice versa. So I welcome this exchange, and I hope that we hear the thoughts and concerns, and we are able to represent you in Hartford.
The only other thing I would add to that, and it just brings to mind, it's not just lack of information sometimes shared, and it goes to my point of devil's in the details, right, with the minimum wage impact. And minimum wage impact and family medical leave were hailed as the 2 greatest things the state of Connecticut has ever done by certain sectors. And it is probably the most damaging thing that we've done to our economy at this particular point. But it's also misinformation that is shared and shared rampantly. We have a citizen legislator. I take that to heart. I was not a politician at all before being involved. I love this state, and I'm doing this job because I want to be able to stay in the state. My service, I'll tell you, is selfish in that regard. I am fighting for the ability of every individual to be able to stay and thrive in the state of Connecticut. So, even when we look at tolls, when we talk about alternatives, the mischaracterization of what the alternative plans have been is probably as damning as lack of information shared on details. We've got to be able to do a better job. There's got to be honesty, truthfulness, and transparency to the people of this state, and not all the spin that you hear on different, issues. So I think that is absolutely critical.
So when we talk about taxes, this is the main reason why I push to be on the finance committee, because I do feel like our government, just like our families, we all have to spend within our means. And there's kind of this, working in the financial sector, there's always kind of this belief, especially coming out of kind of Wall Street, that, well, if Connecticut gets itself in trouble, it can always kind of like just tweak up the income tax rate a little bit and they'll get additional revenue stream in. But that no longer works. And you see people moving out. Increasing the income tax is not going to actually increase more revenue. It's just going to speed people potentially moving out of state and hurting our economy. And I selfishly ran for office because I've got an 8 and a 10-year-old. I would love for them to potentially go to college, come back to the state that I invested in, my wife and I love so much. Right now, you're seeing too many people who retire, they're out of here. We all know the expression 6 months in a day. We shouldn't all know that expression so well. And we also know a lot of our friends who have kids that go to college and who don't come back here. And then that leaves a more of a tax burden on those that remain. It becomes a cycle. So are we going to be able to cut ourselves out of this problem? No. But we need to start taking our fiscal responsibilities a lot more serious. And like Laura, I'm not going to be a career politician. I believe in term limits. I will be here for, hopefully, if God willing, if I'm given the opportunity to serve so much, no more than 4 full terms, because I feel like Hartford isn't always listening to its voters.
Cristin, would you?
Thank you very much. And Mr. Knight, thank you for the question. You're right. I don't think as many people know about the employee deduction for FMLA, for the family medical leave. I think that's correct. I do think that that was part of how that bill was able to be passed and negotiated, was that it would be an employee piece without an employer match. And we could debate the merits of that bill, but I just wanted to acknowledge that piece of what you were saying. I certainly supported it, and I think that it's a balance between how we're supporting workers and business. Is sometimes we look at it as people fighting against each other, and I'd like for us to continue to look more at how we're working together. As Representative Devlin said, there are always, when you're first implementing legislation, pieces that are going to need to be tweaked, and I expect that with that legislation for certain. In terms of the other group that you were referring to, now I am not intimately familiar with it, but my understanding of that group was because of the SALT deductions issue. That group was an effort to try and figure out how we could help our residents because of the federal decisions that were made. And also my understanding, again, I don't have intimate knowledge, but there were some things thrown around at the very end of session by certain legislators, and there were folks like me, I was one of them, who said, this is not something to be, try to get in at the end of session. So that was the decision, was to make and create a group that would look at this and try and understand, would there be a net benefit to taxpayers in the end? I think you raised an important point. Our commissioner has moved on to a different position, and I don't know what the status is, and we'll find out where that stands.
Wages. And the fact is, I run the numbers. 80% of the Trump Tax Act, I'll call it that, was beneficial to middle class. 80%. The people who got hurt were the rich. So we have a soft fixation that we shouldn't have.
Well, I'm just giving you context for why the decision was made without debating the policy.
I just want to add in regards to the minimum wage and the family medical leave. Look, we all think it's an important component of dignity and caring for our loved ones during critical moments, being able to have a fair living wage. There's no doubt. It's, again, in the execution of it. What we looked at, some of the amendments related to minimum wage, was to be able to perhaps exempt our nonprofits. Nonprofits, with their limited budgeting, would still be imposed on that cost bearing. Youth employment. We have literally obliterated the opportunity for young people to be able to get work experience as a result of these wage increases. Our small, mid-sized businesses that have the challenges to be able to barely survive, we not consider that in regards to the incredible escalation that we made in the minimum wage. We had the highest rate of increases than anyone in the country. I think that was far too dramatic, far too compelling in making a statement rather than understanding reality. Family medical leave, no doubt. The idea of being able to care for loved ones is absolutely critical. We all agreed on that. And when I was on labor, I actually supported that in its onset 3-4 years ago. But the challenge is in the execution.
All right,
Here's the trouble.
We're going to move to another question.
We created a brand new structure, over $20+ million in a Department of Labor to execute this. When we look at New York and California that had the same program, they use commercial insurance businesses to administer it. In the state of Connecticut, we decided to create a
Like the
bureaucracy,
retirement
a new
program that just
commission
failed.
to administer it. It's again, example in the details. Wonderful idea, incredibly important, but nevertheless, the execution, you don't hear about it, and it's poor, and it adversely impacts businesses and opportunities in our state.
All right, I welcome the next question, please.
Sorry, he's taller than I am. So my name is Heather Dabrowski, and my name is Heather Dabrowski,
Thank
and
you.
I live in the Holland Hill School District. And I'm here with my friend Paula, who lives in the Beacon View district of Fairfield. And as Cristin and Tony probably already know, my question has to go around 830G housing. Our respective neighborhoods have united about some proposed 830G housing, both on High Street and on Beacon View. Our concern has nothing to do with affordable housing. Understand we are all very supportive of it and recognize the need for it. However, our concern has to do with the sheer over-intense use of these small plots of lands that these developers are building these huge, huge developments on using the guise of 830G. We have reached out over the course of this past year, we have reached out to all of our local politicians asking for help. Again, not opposed to affordable housing, but we're opposed to the destruction of our communities and the loss of open space.
It's just too big.
So my point is that, you know, we've heard from Brenda, both pre and post election. We've heard from Tony. Cristin, we haven't heard from you. I know you were at the Holland Hill Town Hall that we ran, but can you tell us where your support is? Again, not against affordable housing, but as your constituents, we're looking for help to save our neighborhoods. Having these huge, huge buildings that really, where we're just littered with capes and, you know, small colonials.
And not enough parking for the people that will live there.
So can you go on record and tell us where you stand? And I'm also going to ask Laura and Brian too. Again, Tony, I already know where you are. We know where Brenda is. But can you tell us where you are with this? And will you help us as your constituents?
So I'm happy. I've had some conversations actually with Paula, and I'm happy to continue to have those. The 830G issues that we faced, and we actually faced some similar issues years ago over in the Stratfield neighborhood, is the idea of a developer who is trying to misuse that and put in certain places developments that are just not appropriate. Size, I think, is a big issue. And I think that my approach to this has been from a very practical level in terms of trying to see what we can do within the laws that exist. If Brenda were up here, and we've had this conversation before among this table, there's been a lot of requests, and Paula and I had a conversation recently about trying to change the 830G statute. I sat with the Fairfield senior advocates and had a conversation, some of them are here today, about changing 830G, which I was practical with them and saying in a short session in particular, and given the history of that legislation, I don't know that at the state level, and that's the role that I have, particularly, is that are we going to be able to make substantive changes to that? Then no, I don't think in this short session. Is it a conversation that we need to have in an ongoing basis? Yes. I was at a forum in the Valley with folks, and I talked with a member of our Affordable Housing Committee to talk about how we can work together with the Affordable Housing Commissions, with our affordable housing plans. There's actually a mini grant available through a foundation to try and have some community conversation about what steps we can do long term. I think you're asking also about specifically in the short term.
I'm asking on a local level. You're mentioning
Yes,
the state. And I will tell you, when we sat down with Brenda, again, pre and post election, she made it clear that she's for affordable housing, but she wants it smaller and more scattered. I agree with that. Tony has said something very similar. They have both offered us all of their resources and their help. But where are you on this? And again, I'm looking at the local level for both Beacon View and High Street and other proposed.
May I add? A lot of the problem is it feels like, some of these builders, they're predatory. They take advantage of the neighborhoods, and they'll put up whatever they feel like, and it can be 3 feet from the property line. It is, and on Beacon View, Mr. Pollack from Sammy Southport Pizza wants to put up a 4-story apartment building that, doesn't belong in a little neighborhood. It'll be 4 times the size of any, or 5, I don't know. It's going to have 20 apartments in it. And it won't support families because they're all going to be 1-bedroom units and studios. And there'll be no place for children to play. So they're taking up all this space. There's no room for families really to flourish, and there's going to be too many cars. How are we supposed to manage this density? It's way over, and it has to be done. Something has to be done now, and there somehow maybe planning and zoning for a month can put off any approvals so that we can have a discussion. Something like that should be done. A month, 2 months, some kind of a moratorium when we have these predatory builders coming into our neighborhoods and not really negotiating with the neighbors themselves at all.
And so if I may, just specifically, those are 2 specific projects. I know a little bit more about High Street than I do about the project, and Paula and I have had some conversation. And I understand very much and sympathize with the concern about density. And my feeling is, and my hope is that the Fairfield Housing Authority and the neighbors, that there will be a negotiation. And I understand that may not be where it is. And I'm happy to sit down directly and talk with the neighbors. I too, like Brenda, and I think like all of us here, strongly support affordable housing. As I mentioned earlier in my remarks, when I think about workforce development, when I think about growing our economy, when I think about supporting our seniors, and when I think about education, I think affordable housing is a really critical component of all of that. But this, right, but I'm just, you asked me to specifically comment, and so the project on High Street is a very different type of project. And I try and approach these issues from within the realities of where we are, and then what we can look at changing. So in terms of within the realities of where we are, I have actually from the beginning encouraged the Housing Authority before they went forward to sit down with the neighbors, and I don't think that went as it should have. And I'm still hopeful that can happen, and I'm happy to help facilitate any and all conversations to address the concerns around density and to talk about issues like parking. Again, 2 very different projects, but the issues around parking being a specific example of how to look at what is expected and anticipated versus what people are concerned about. And I think I'm happy to sit down and get into that. I'm not going to go on record and say I will fight against every project. I want to look with you at where things stand, and I will be honest, with the High Street project right now, I'm not up to speed on where things are currently, and I'm happy to sit down with the neighbors and have a meeting.
Okay, so that's great. So again, we would be having this conversation if it were $1 million condos versus affordable housing. So I want to take the title of affordable housing away from it because it's about the density of it and the destruction of our neighborhoods, again, because I think that's very important. I think people get lost in the name of affordable housing. So regardless of that,
and that's a safety issue.
It is a safety issue, but you're absolutely correct. And I just think that, we have reached out, and again, Tony and Brenda have come to us. So if we can proactively know that we have your support to set up these meetings. The Housing Authority has never reached out to us. We have reached out to them. We've never been, I'm on the executive committee. I have never sat down with the Housing Authority. And I understand that's great. You've asked them to do it, but they've never done it. So we need your support at a higher level because we need to say, look, maybe there is going to be a negotiation, but I just need to know that we vote for you guys. We need you guys to say, hey, we're here to at least facilitate the conversations. Well, I don't think you can change
as your newest member, I would want you to know I agree with you, and I do not believe the projects as currently envisioned are right for Fairfield. So let's reach out. Let's have conversations.
Great.
We could talk at the state level about changing it from 10% to 7.5%, or other novel ideas such as, if you finance as a first-time homeowner and you do the loan through CHFA, which qualifies for the affordable housing targets, so you can get to that 10% threshold. Maybe you get a property tax abatement of, say, $500, which is small beans. But I don't think any of those things are going to pass in the near term. I agree with Cristin on that. So I think it's really about focusing on how we can help you today on the local level. So I know we've spoken. I would love to work with you.
I'd like to invite everybody to the meeting on Tuesday at McKinley School, 7:30. We need some people in there, and I'd love it if you would all be there.
I just want you to know that you also have my full support. And we are lucky in our town to have a first select woman who understands the 830G issue and is proactively working to ensure that our town meets the threshold. What's concerning to me is that as the governor is trying to negotiate his toll bill and wheeling and dealing, right, like the $50 million train station the rep in Enfield's getting for his vote on tolls. The latest news piece, I don't know if you saw it recently, where he has made a commitment, which I'm sure was another trade-off, is that he's going to get serious, and like all these Tony towns in Connecticut who are trying to stop affordable housing, he's going to support that. I agree with you, and I think everybody in here, affordable housing is an important thing to do. But make no mistake about it, what's happening is predatory developers.
All right, I think we need to move on to the next.
It just gets too big, and it doesn't fit the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, legislators. Thank you, League of Women Voters, for having us today.
Thank you. Can you state your name, please?
My name's Ann Minuski, and I'm from Easton. I'm a mom. I'm a former counselor. I am the first vice president of Connecticut Republican Assembly. I never remember to say these things. I'm also the Connecticut contact for child abuse in the classroom, which was the push to work against FERPA. The FERPA is the data collection of our children. So good morning. I have a lot of things in my head, but I will try to streamline it. I will see some of you in the upcoming session. My concern is on Common Core. Betsy DeVos said Common Core is dead. Common Core is not dead in any of our states that has not done any change, and that's Connecticut. Right now, we have, it's not named Common Core anymore, and that's something that people don't understand. It's now called ESSA. So the reauthorization of the 1965 Elementary and Secondary Education Act is ESSA. Every Student Succeeds Act. Every student is not succeeding. There was a bill proposed last session. It died in committee to remove Common Core, and I am so happy that representative did that. We need it to go further this session, and I understand it's a budgetary session. I understand it's only committee, but we are at the precipice. We need change. We need to allow our local districts more control. We cannot have any future mandates. So I'm thinking maybe repeal mandates, whatever, small things, I get it. But the other thing I would like you to know this morning is that the ESSA plan, I will send you, expired November 30th, 2019. And I had this epiphany this past week. So it's expired. So we have no plan right now. The State Board of Education has us enslaved. There's no other way to put it, because you find people only can do so much with legislation. We need a law immediately. And I will send the language, because I've talked to attorneys, that you legislators see anything that is changed before it goes forward. It's not me, it's my attorney friends.
Do you have a question for the panel?
My question is, what can be done this session? But I'm trying to give them some breadcrumbs on what are possibilities to be done to improve local control.
So as the newest member of the Education Committee, obviously I'm not in favor of a top-down approach. I think in many ways the state should be looking to Fairfield, not the other way around. As it relates to Common Core, I still want to learn coming into the Education Committee, so I'm not going to take a position on that today. But I do think the state does need to look to empower Fairfield. Things like the forced regionalization are scary. I don't think that's going to happen in a short session. I think there's enough suburban Democrats who are like, no way. So I think we're safe for that for this legislative session. But there are a fair amount of mandates that I think we do need to be revisiting because they are costly. And when you have successful school districts, I think they should be given greater flexibility.
So I would agree, but in addition to your concerns, and I also don't support a top-down approach, I look forward to receiving that language from you, and I will look at that and seriously consider how I can help you advance that. Obviously, devil's in the details, but let's see what we can do. And we have a bill deadline coming up, I think, next week also. What else did I want to mention to you? Sorry, I'm a tad scattered today, but please send that out and let's take a look.
And I would just add, in terms of mandate repeal, I think it's important to look at I've been part of the conversation about social emotional learning, the collaborative that's been meeting, and I think they're looking at model school policies, but part of the issue is if you're going to ask people to implement and do training in that, what pieces would be taken away in terms of teacher training. I also just, want to note, in terms of the Common Core kind of conversation, I think the look at the state is really more about what curriculum are we offering, what is the State Department of Ed able to provide districts in support. There certainly are things that we are asking districts to make sure that they educate students about. I'm going to tell you right now that I'm going to be working on adding vaping, for example, to tobacco as part of our health curriculums. So yes, I think there is a place for that message and messages. That's a health example, not necessarily a specific academic example. But I think that's, when we think about what's happening at Connecticut, we're looking at content areas. But specifically in terms of mandates, if you have specifics, I'd be interested in hearing what those are.
And if I can just add, because it did come back to me, we meet annually with the superintendents, and they also have significant concerns, but that may be an ally group for you in terms of, what you're also trying to accomplish. So I just want to share that with you.
And I want to thank you for your advocacy. As an Easton resident, it's an honor to represent you. We may not always agree, but I applaud your advocacy and your enthusiasm, so thank you. That being said, isn't it remarkable? Common Core started back to George Bush's administration, and it has had lasting effects. But for me, it's all about our focus on testing. And testing is an important component of measurement, but it does not truly, in my mind, reflect the real purpose of education. You can't measure a child's love of learning. You can't measure a child's build of confidence. You cannot measure an ability to have real dialogue and learn through experiential experiences. We have sheltered so much of our children from that. And what you're saying is there's a balancing act, and testing shouldn't always be the measure. And I support that. And we do have a balancing act to challenge. I support health education awareness in regards to vaping and tobacco, as well as marijuana and drug influences in the opiate crisis. It's important. And I also believe there's certain things we can do on a state level in regards to education awareness mandate. One such thing is something I'm very proud of, to work in raising that Holocaust and genocide education, to be able to make sure that future generations are educated on the atrocities and the horrors of genocide and racism and hate. So with that said, there's a balancing act. But even more important on a local level, as I go back to what my focus is, we have an issue in the town of Fairfield in regards to the racial ratios that impact our education mission at McKinley Elementary School. I had the exchange with the State Department of Education nearly 2 years ago where the chairman said, we're not doing right by the students in the McKinley district. I personally invited the Commissioner of Education and the Chairman of Education, who uttered those statements, State Board of Education, to tour and get a firsthand experience of the quality and the excellence of education in McKinley, not reflected by test scores. And what came out of that experience was the chairman of the State Department of Education literally saying to me, I apologize. I did not know. What a wonderful, wonderful educational opportunity you afford the students in McKinley. So as we try to tackle the racial quota concerns on a state top-down level, we have to measure each case by case. But the best way you do that is a real, live exchange of information, ideas, and particular different points of view. So I share with you that we have moved so much from top down, and we really should incorporate not only from the bottom up of just our local Board of Educations, but a bottom up of residents and children that are impacted by the educational experience.
Thank you. We'll move to the next question.
Thank you. Can I just add that Florida has moved. They're the only state right now that is moving to remove Common Core. Governor DeSantis and the plan. I have not seen it. It's hot off the presses, so I will let you know that. And also the testing. There is a federal proposal to go back to 2005. What we had was testing in 3rd grade, testing in 8th grade, and testing in 10th or 11th. I forget what it was then, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bill Gerber, live on 25 Shady Hill Road, and I'm on the RTN District 2. I would like to thank Senator Hwang. I think it was about a year ago, I expressed an interest in biotechnology to him, and he invited me up for a conference in Hartford the next day. I believe that investors in companies, when they look at a company and the value of a company, they look at expense control. But if you're only looking at expense control, usually you're looking at a company, if it has no vision for the top line, you're looking at a company that's probably not going to do very well over the long run. And I believe it's important for states to look at the top line, to look at a vision, what they want their state to be, what industries they want to promote in their state. And I know from my experiences with Senator Hwang, and so I'd like to start with you. When you look at Connecticut and your passion for technology, biotechnology, and supporting it, the education to support that, when you look at New York and Massachusetts and our competing states, some of them are competing for IP that actually comes out of our state, like at Yale, UConn. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What would you like to do? And I'd like other people to chime in how to make, we need a vision. We have to grow the top line. We can't just cut expenses. Hopefully we all agree on that.
That's a great question. And I actually think of the Chamber of Commerce breakfast we just had, and there was a great analogy at that Chamber of Commerce. Because let's think of like Massachusetts. We used to call it Taxachusetts for so many times. We used to kind of like, they were kind of the butt of the joke. Oh, they can't get out of the way. Well, you know what? Now we're kind of the one that needs to kind of get our act in gear. And I think one thing that Massachusetts has really done well is that they partnered with their universities. And I would love to see, you can make this analogy to Cambridge, which is kind of the idea incubator, and Boston being the idea incubator. And then you look at Worcester, where some of this higher skilled manufacturing occurs. You can make that analogy and say, why can't that not be us? Why can't that analogy not work so it's, instead of it's Cambridge, it's New Haven. In Fairfield, we've got Fairfield University, we've got Sacred Heart right here. So you could make that analogy that the idea incubator would be New Haven and Fairfield, South Norwalk, and the manufacturing could occur in, say, not Worcester, but in Bridgeport. I think that would be an area that I would like, as a new legislator, to kind of really look to see where we can partner with universities to keep our young students that come to Connecticut. We have great educational systems. Let's find a way to keep them here. And if we can do that, and then also have, we're not going to be the dirtier type low-skill manufacturing. That doesn't play to our strengths as a state. But I think when you look at the aerospace area, for example, the defense industry, that skilled manufacturing, we could still be really strong. And those are the jobs that build a middle class. And those are the jobs that we've been losing. So we need to focus there, and then obviously you play to your strengths with insurance, financial services, play to those clusters that you already have or are already kind of there and build upon. That's my vision of how I would like the state to take the state forward.
So if I could comment as well, it's not just about cutting, but our state spending has skyrocketed, particularly over the last 30 years, almost 256%, at the same time when we've had no job growth. When I moved to Connecticut in 1988, right, we've always been a high-cost state, but salaries also offset that. But high-paying jobs have been leaving, and what's happening is lower-paying jobs. And the answer isn't to falsely impose a wage level in an economy that isn't growing, right? But to your point of finding industries, there's been a lot of work done on that, in terms of aerospace, defense, biotech, but also from a legislative standpoint, we're killing ourselves. You might hear sound bites of great legislation that everybody, so you have to understand, 99%, 95% of all legislation, we agree. We work together. You have to work together. But when it comes to the money and budget and tax policy, that is where absolutely there's a fair amount of differing. But there was a lot of talk in the House about a bill to incent biotech companies, right? Because we need to have people come and stay and get those jobs. Great, everybody feels good. And then in the budget, they cut research tax credits. Well, let me tell you, a biotech company is going to be way more influenced by research tax credits than it is about some incentive for employees. So it's terribly inconsistent, and that's where I think it astounds me sometimes. Like, why aren't we really being serious about the industries that we should support, and then do that holistically and stop all this kind of contradictory craziness? So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I mean, what would you do to get us more serious and to get people on board, and who's not? There has to be some movement to make that happen.
So clearly, it's getting the legislative body together with the administration, right? And in this past budget, that was also the Democrat leaders who negotiated that deal with the governor. But here's a bright light, and somebody I've also offered that I would support 110%, which I did to the governor as well. I told him I'm not going to support you on tolls, but his rhetoric when he was elected was pro, turning our state around. I said I'll support you 110%, is our economic development commissioner. I held him in high regard. And I think he can also be a key player in influencing the administration. But his goal is to, identify those sectors and support. So I am happy to work. I will work with them to be able to either not always look for us to do new things, because sometimes the government should stay out, but not do any harm. So I hope that helps.
And just to follow up on that, it goes back to what I said in my opening remarks, actually, which is the State Department of Economic and Community Development and CERC, which I didn't share the initials, but just wanted to make sure, Connecticut Economic Resource Center, which is where Indra Nooyi is involved, and there's a new director there. So I think those may seem like wonky kinds of things, but having folks who have that kind of background and experience and working together with them and creating the bridge and connection between the executive branch there and that level of experience and that type of perspective with the legislative branch is so important. I've spent a lot of time talking with the governor and the governor's staff about building that bridge between the legislature and the executive branch, remembering that we're co-equal branches of government and trying to work together. And it gets kind of wonky. I did a Facebook post recently, legislative life isn't just about nice Instagram pictures all the time. It's like Mary Hoag's question too, right? That she has, but that's how we get it done, is actually looking at those very specific pieces. But just to answer your broader question too, Bill, which I think is absolutely so true, we have to have a vision for the state that looks at the big picture. And when we look at the big picture, we're looking at things we have to look at our neighborhood issues, like we were talking about earlier. But we have to look at the big picture in terms of creating more equity, Having a state that has some of the biggest income inequality and the highest educational achievement gaps in the nation is not something to brag about. So we have to look at policies that will do that. We have to look at how we zone for placemaking, which will help attract businesses. Again, sidewalks and bike paths may seem really silly to people, but that is the kind of stuff that is helping to attract companies and workers. We, of course, have to look at our policies around taxes and spending. That's overarching all of the time. We have to look at education. Couldn't agree more. We're sitting at Fairfield University. What an incredible resource. I have talked extensively over the years with the Connecticut Conference of Independent Colleges about, again, building that bridge and using the resources that are available. You know, Brian talked in the beginning, and I've said this many times, one of the biggest asset in our state is our educated workforce. And I say often, the people of Fairfield in particular could probably solve all the world's problems because we just have that much education experience and civic commitment. But what we haven't done well enough is to make those connections, build those bridges, and then implement on that. So I think that's what we have to do.
Okay,
I
all right, but I'm going to keep you to like a minute because we've got a lot of people in line and we're running out of time. And I want
Well, let me say that we have done in bioscience and many other respects, taken one step forward and 3 steps backwards. But I'm happy to report that we did implement a phase out of the capital-based tax that we talked about 3 years ago. And I do believe that we have positives going forward. We have a lot of challenges in our state, but these are some examples of success stories, and we should really embrace them and focus on them. And one of them is SEMA4. SEMA4 was a company 4 years ago that had less than 10 employees, focusing on genomics and personalized medicine. They decided not to go anywhere else but stay in Connecticut. 4 years later, they just opened up a brand new research operation in Stamford, Connecticut. They chose not to go anywhere else. They will now, within the end of the year, have over 150 employees with an average median income of over $100,000. These are success stories that we should embrace. But it is embraced because it is a public-private dynamic. It's a partnership. I am a fundamental believer that government do not create jobs. Businesses and people do. And this is an example of a partnership. We should not impose mandates. We should not impose our way of thinking up on the gold dome of Hartford. We should let our businesses succeed. One last pitch is the fact that I want to, no, I'm killing you, but there's so much to share, is the fact that I want to make a pitch to Jessica and Bill and their efforts on Team Teddy, which is happening on March, I think, 11th. March, right? And the idea is they're raising money for St. Baldrick's in honor of their child, Teddy. And they have done this in so many years. And Bill and I are going to shave our heads to raise money on behalf of raising money for Team Teddy and St. Baldrick's. That's it, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Mary? And we do have a number of people, so if we could make the questions as brief as possible and make sure that we can get to the answers.
Yeah, my question will be short. You got my notes.
Thanks, Mary.
So I'm Mary Hogue. I live in Fairfield. I'm going to ask about the new and improved bottle bill that did not get through the last session, which I hope will be raised again. And it will increase the deposit on the bottle bill. It will expand what bottles will be included, and it will increase the redemption rate to the people that will hopefully stay in business. This is pertinent to what you've been talking about, keeping jobs in the state. We'll also hopefully keep the glass out of the contamination that is causing a problem. I think everybody knows that there's a problem with our recycling structure in the state, in the country. And so hopefully this will address that. So I'm asking if you would support this new and improved bottle bill, which I assume will be raised in this session.
I'll start and be real quick on answering. It's definitely something I'm very supportive in trying to understand the details a little bit better. But ultimately, I think Fairfield should be very proud of our entire delegation as an advocacy group that is very supportive of the environment. You have recognition, and I know for myself it's an incredible honor for the multiple years to be chosen as an environmental leader champion on behalf of the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters. It's an honor that I am grateful for and happily to advocate every single day.
We'll just go down the line. Mary, you're an incredible advocate, and I'm going to continue to work with you. I'm not as I don't know all the details, but Representative Gresco, you can be sure, has been working with me on this issue. And I've heard from the First Selectwoman in terms of the impact of the cost of recycling now, which used to be money into the budget. It's now money out. So we've got to address this. Yeah, it's huge.
So, and first, thank you. For those that don't know Mary Hogue, I like to think we're the hardest working people in here. She probably is. I go to meetings and I'm like, Mary, you're here? She's like, yeah. She really is. You're amazing. So, I am supportive. I struggle a little bit with the 5 cents to 2 cents, but overall, the 5 cents to 10 cents, I'm sorry. But overall, I am very supportive. But just by way of background, so China and other places were taking a lot of our recyclables, and they would pay us to take it for a small amount of money. Now that's not happening. So this has been a huge issue for municipal budgets. So I think this is a great solution. So I look forward to working with you on it.
Absolutely happy to work on it. I know this has struggled in the legislature, but there has been really good working committees to try to get this going. I share that same concern, and we've got to look at it in context, right? So the grocery bill, the grocery tax is still in the budget. If we can't get that pulled out, right? We just had the new increase on rotisserie chicken and other prepared foods in one of our largest tax increases just in this past budget. So I am also concerned about the 5 to 10 cents, but I'd also like to know more then about the opportunities for recyclables, what kind of communities might be helped or hurt by this as well. I am more than happy to have conversations and try to get to a solution that we can get this thing passed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Kathy Politi, and rumor has it that there will be a special session on tolls. Almost a year ago, Governor Lamont advised truck-only tolls would not raise enough revenue. Rhode Island is currently involved in a lawsuit with the trucking industry over truck-only tolls. Traffic diversion could be a huge problem. How do you plan on voting for the tolls?
Can I start on that?
Sure.
Okay, so I'll probably be the biggest no in the legislature, but here is why.
That's accurate.
And why people need to understand about this legislation. If I haven't seen any details, I'm the ranking on transportation, haven't seen a thing. But I was at a very scripted program that the governor participated in recently in Westport. So you have to ask yourself some questions, right? He's now targeting semi-tractor trailer trucks. Well, that's an easy image. We've driven by them on the highway. They can be scary. But it's not the size of a vehicle that creates road damage, it's the weight of the vehicle. So why is he targeting semi-tractor trailers when cement trucks, dump trucks, city transit buses, like the buses that go to the casino, they also are as heavy or heavier than a semi-tractor trailer truck. Now, I'm not advocating toll them all because I don't think we should have tolls. It's the most costly and regressive tax that can be imposed. And make no doubt about it, tolls will be expanded to passenger cars because many of the Democrat legislators who are supporting this do not support truck only. They want cars. So some other things you need to think about, and some of the scare tactics are the Mianus River Bridge. One of the legislators had the nerve to say, you hold your breath going over bridges in Connecticut because they're structurally deficient. Structurally deficient sounds scary, right? But in highway terms, that might mean it needs painting. That means to have a little repair. It does not mean the bridge is going to fall down. And that is disingenuous to the people in the state of Connecticut. In addition, the cost to implement, the cost to maintain. We have no idea. How many state employees are we going to hire to manage this? Because in the previous toll bills, it was quite significant. Trucks also do pay when they drive through the state of Connecticut. We collect about $30 million a year from trucks, and they pay it on a quarterly basis. We have taxes in the state of Connecticut that other states don't have. So Massachusetts collects about the same amount of money that we would have collected on the broader toll bill through our petroleum gross excise tax. So the idea that, well, every other states have tolls, so we need tolls too, why do we want to add another tax? We have money to invest in our transportation, and make no doubt about that. And it's interesting because even the majority leader of the Senate was saying, we do not raid the transportation fund. Year over year, we have diverted hundreds of millions of dollars. Hundreds of millions of dollars. And in this past budget cycle, the governor diverted money again. But they're saying, no, we're going to put it back. We're going to put it back in 2 years. Well, that's a new budget cycle. And that's when the diversions happen. So in addition, the bill, again, that I haven't seen, includes project labor agreements. Now, what that means is that the state is dictating the work to union-only shops. Now, I don't care if the construction worker is union or non-union, but that excludes 80% of our construction industry. And, make no mistake, it will jack the costs at least 20%. So why should our government be dictating where the work goes? It should be free, commercial, competitive bidding. So there are some real things that are wrong with this. He's been holding the bonding bill hostage with, scare tactics that Republicans want to cut school construction. No, not one single Republican wants to cut school construction, and not one alternative has included that. So there's lots of things wrong. He has also said, well, it's the tractor-trailer trucks, because they're overweight, are causing those rivets that we feel. Then open the weigh stations, and then jack the fines. I don't care if you jack the fines, they're breaking the law. So there's so many things wrong. To put infrastructure on 6 of our highways, no state has that many. Massachusetts has 1. I think New York might have 2. New Jersey has 1. I mean, it is a recipe for a new revenue stream that they would like more than anything, because we can't stop spending. We can invest in our infrastructure. To say now we need $150 million and that's why we're going to do this, come on. There are better ways to do this, and you can bet I will fight this as strongly as I can, because I think it is wrong for the state of Connecticut, and it is wrong for our taxpayers, and it is wrong for businesses. School lunches, one of our biggest suppliers of school lunches uses those trucks. One of the biggest suppliers in Connecticut to grocery stores uses those trucks. Construction goods come in on rail to stay off the roads. They got to be picked up in those trucks in New Haven to get through the state and deliver them. So it is ill-conceived. Again, I just can't wait to see all the bells and whistles that have been shoved in to be able to buy votes to support it, like the $50 million train station and other things that we're seeing. It's wrong.
Well, it's hard to follow Laura when it comes to tolls. I'll try my best. And I am also a no vote. I get there in a somewhat different way than Laura does. I look at like this. If we could potentially put some tolls at our borders to capture some of the out-of-staters, I would be, okay, that makes some sense. We cannot do that because of federal law. That's not a possibility. So, in the other issues, I kind of analogize this to the income tax. Many of us in this room were around when the income tax was put into place. We were in a fiscal crisis. It was additional revenue stream that was supposed to solve all of our problems. Well, here we are today in the year 2020. Has the state income tax fixed our problems? No, I would say it would exacerbate them. So I think Hartford cannot really be trusted with this money to do it right. I think this additional revenue stream will lead to just more spending and feeding of that bureaucratic beast. So I would like to see, before we start talking tolls, let's talk about structural financial reform. Let's have that conversation first before we start talking about tolls. I also agree with Laura on the fact that, these funds, they can't touch the toll money. That's all agreed upon because of federal law. But the Special Transportation Fund, those funds, I think, will be hanging out there naked if we have tolls, and that will just go into the general fund, which is basically the big black hole of government spending. So I have a problem with that also. And this whole idea of trucks only, it is the camel's nose under the tent. They already showed their hand that they want the auto tolls also, but they know that there's no political support for that. But as soon as we get the truck tolls, those are up. The next recession or the next, fiscal hiccup, if we see year in, year out in the state, well, now we need to do cars only. So, it just doesn't work. So the way I look at it is, before we do things like spend, millions of dollars on a busway between New Britain and Hartford, let's prioritize Fairfield County. You want us to be the economic engine for the state. Give us the tools to succeed. When we're trying to figure out where state money is being spent, that we include within that the economic impact of those projects. The state Republican Senate plan of using the rainy day fund, I have some concerns about that. Yes, you could potentially use some of that money for that, but I would not want to use that entire amount. We don't need the Cadillac of plans, but there's certain basic things we need to do, like getting our trains quicker into New York City, working with New York State on that. That's not a Connecticut-only thing that we could just solve on our own. But let's work with New York. Let's work with the federal government. Let's fix 95. Let's prioritize progress where we can fix things. So that's how I get to no to tolls. Thank you.
So the simple answer for me is that yes, I will be supporting funding our transportation infrastructure. The choices that we have to do so, and I agree actually that trying to take away funds that we had agreed to put in is not a good idea, and I'm going to continue to be an advocate inside of my caucus to make sure that we avoid that. I was unsuccessful in this past go around, but in terms of what's on the table right now, I think it's true. The revenue projections, I don't know that they're going to get us where we need to be. And where we need to be is what businesses have told us. They need the infrastructure in transportation in this state to be able to grow their businesses here. And we know we're commuters, or we're people who are driving on the roads around town. We're taking the trains. And I was actually at Greater Bridgeport Transit. Don't forget the bus. Probably not many of you in here are bus riders, but that's another important part of our transportation infrastructure. So I could say a lot more, but just I recognize there are folks behind you. But I do intend to support the options that we have before us. I also have not seen the bill, though, so I'm going to have to actually take a look and see where that is. So
I feel people are leaving because they're overtaxed. I don't think people are leaving because of traffic. I think people are leaving because they're overtaxed, not because of traffic problems.
Well, I'm just basing what I've said about transportation infrastructure on the McKinsey report that was done a few years ago for the state.
I think it's important to understand that we've talked about tolls for literally forever. But what's remarkable is we are on the precipice of possibly voting on an issue in which there are no details. There is no bill out. And to be honest with you, I struggle with the fact of trying to address a yes or no vote. But based upon the evidence of my experience, I'm leaning toward a no because of a fundamental lack of details and clarity and accountability of taxpayer money. First and foremost, I think you have to address the fact that, one recent analysis came out that the gas tax, literally from 2000 to 2015, nearly $4 billion were collected. How many people remember that that was going to address our infrastructure and transportation? Well, guess what? It didn't go in there. It went in the general fund, nearly $4 billion. Then some of it went back into the transportation fund, but it was diverted. That's the key word, right? Then the other factor is we had the governor come out, and I like the man. He's a gentleman. But that being said, he campaigned on a truck only. Then literally a month later, he said, in his own words, it was unsustainable. So the back and forth is troubling. Now, the idea of trucks only, if you had a general poll, how many people truly believe it's only going to be truck only in the long run? You don't. And I think ultimately you want to look at the fact that we have a spending challenge, not a revenue challenge. But if we don't discipline by shutting off the spigot of continually taxing people, seeking additional revenue, there's really no discipline in the legislature to do the necessary decision-making that's needed. So I say, let's evaluate it. Let's take a look at it. Ultimately, I think Democrats and Republicans all agree infrastructure and transportation are critical to our economic sustainability, viability, and quality of life. The difference is how we pay for it. But if you really look at it and you look and dig hard, there should be money to be able to address the issue. And when you want to talk about using tragedy, I struggle with that because the use of the Mayanas Bridge of a tragedy is, to me, unconscionable because those are lives and people affected. But if you took a look at that, the Mayanas Bridge collapse occurred when we had tolls.
It was an engineering problem.
Right? So ultimately, let's get to the facts. Let's address these issues. Let's solve the problems moving forward. Look, the Senate Republican proposed a faster program that did use rainy day funds, but the intent was to reduce our long-term liability in pensions. That being said, is it perfect? No. But nevertheless, you had the details. You could beat it up all you want. Right now, under the dark of night, nobody knows about this detail that's going to impact every commuter, every rider in this state. And that, to me, is a lack of transparency, a lack of accountability, and that has led us to the problems that we've had in the current budget, from the grocery tax to the 10 cents plastic bag. I supported the plastic bag ban, but I didn't look to tag revenue onto people. Again, fast forwarding this and jamming this bill without public input is not democracy. And ultimately, it's a bill that comes pay due with the taxpayers of the state. And you know what? Enough already.
Let me just add one other really quick thing. I'll make it super
All right,
quick.
I feel bad. We've got a lot of people that still want to
So the
speak.
governor's chief of staff and the Senate Minority Leader, Len Fasano, went down to Washington and did a lot of work together. That's Democrats and Republicans, right? Came back, and we, as part of the leadership of transportation, met with governor's staff, et cetera, and the leaders of the House and Senate, where they shared these RIFA and TIFA loans. These are the low-interest federal loans that you hear about. We support that wholeheartedly. Again, haven't seen the bill, but I understand the Democrat bill isn't just putting in tolls, it's also using $100 million in general obligation bonds, and it's also using the rainy day fund. So it goes back to those details of sound bites. We got to see the details, and there better be a public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here this morning. Louder. Okay, I'm sorry. My name is Cristin Devlin. I am from Westport currently, but I grew up in Fairfield. These are my sisters Elise and Marcy. Marcy, there she is. We are, I know you guys have spoken a lot about education today. Education for all children, right? Not discriminatory, no segregation, making sure children can get ahead to college. They can pursue their happiness. They can pursue their dreams. They can get where they need to be despite their religious beliefs. There is a legislative proposal right now, and I'm sure you all are aware, of mandating or taking away the religious exemption to the vaccinations. That is a discriminatory law. I am 33. I've never been vaccinated. I've never needed one. I have no intention of getting one. And I will tell you that this law is basically telling us we had no right to have an education as children, to get through high school, to get through college, to become lawyers and doctors and accountants and teachers. I have experience teaching. I worked in childcare. I see children, vaccinated and unvaccinated, all the time. It's a parent's decision. It's a parent's personal belief. It's a religious belief to maybe not to vaccinate or to vaccinate. There's a golden rule. You don't do any harm. If you as a parent have seen harm done, how could you then go ahead and do it to the next child? That's one religious argument. The other one is the aborted baby cells that is present in at least 6 shots that children must get before kindergarten. They contain aborted baby cells, the entire genetic sequencing, the entire DNA of an aborted baby. I'm pro-life. That is very, very difficult to be able to come to terms with. If the state has the right to mandate medical procedures on their constituents, can we call ourselves free? Can we be free citizens of this wonderful, amazing country, the United States of America, and yet be mandated that our children must receive 54 doses of vaccinations before kindergarten and 72 before they end high school, and there's no end in sight because there's 270 vaccines in the pipeline? It is a religious freedom issue. It is a personal choice issue. And I will tell you, our group in Connecticut now, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little nervous. Our group has over 1,300 members. That means that we have over 4,000 people in our group alone that will never comply, that will never poison our children or go against our religious beliefs because some legislature tells us that we must. These children are ours from God. They don't belong to the state. The parents are the ones that make the medical decisions. The parents are the ones that have to take care of these children when they are injured. I have a friend that spent $37,000 last year on her autistic son. There's no state help.
Do you have a question?
The question I have, please, is to find out where you guys will to support us, are your constituents, and I will say there's over 10,000 people in Connecticut that will have to be kicked out of school. 10,000 children will be kicked out of school at least by next year if this happens. My question would be then, what would you guys do to please support us and help us to make sure that religious freedoms are not taken away, that there is no discrimination or segregation. Like Tony Hwang was saying, in our schools, we should definitely be honing in on the genocide and the tyranny part of history and make people remember their history. So, and I know Cristin was talking about making the children not have emotional losses in schools and you know, keeping up with that. I mean, imagine the emotion of these children that are kicked out if 10,000 of them actually are.
All right.
So please speak to that.
Yeah, thanks.
Go down the line.
Sure.
Oh, there you go. Thank you for your passionate speech, and thank you for coming out. That being said, it is going to be one of the contentious issues we're going to address. And we have seen this being polarized as a political debate and wedge issue. We've seen campaign flyers come out addressing this issue. Look, you have differences of opinion. I would offer, as I shared earlier, we may have even differences of opinion in my own household. There is the balance between the concern for greater public health safety, which has been vetted and articulated. And I appreciate it's an emotional aspect, but I share with you one of the biggest concerns I have is the fact that as an individual that believes in a woman's right to choose, believe in an individual's right to choose their loved ones, and a strong belief in a separation of church and state. But ultimately, you look at another test that we may encounter in the legislative session about dignity and death, a decision to allow loved ones to make decisions and individuals to make decisions about their life decisions. It is all predicated on individual choice and the determination what to do with their bodies. And I think we have to balance that with the push for greater public health awareness. And I will share with you, if I have to decide on one way versus the other, I have to remain in consistency and respecting an individual's right to choose with regards to their body. That being said, it may be controversial, it may be a volatile issue, but there has to be a consistency in my mind. I will offer this, in the people that I've spoken to, I have never seen a parent who's advocating on this decision to intentionally hurt their child and loved ones. So for us to say, we in the state know better than you as a parent, it raises a concern, a question of when do we set the stop between a separation of church and state, and for us as a state to mandate decisions to people. It may be controversial, but I think it's important to have that discussion, and we will have a debate. I believe there is a public health hearing that is occurring
On the 19th of February.
and there'll be topics and feedback and conversations. I welcome that dialogue, but for me, on a broader basis, I'm still open to listen to more facts and information. But for me, I look at a broader analysis, and I am very eager to hear the thoughts of my fellow delegation members. But it's a principle aspect. Yes. If I believe in all the things that I've articulated earlier, and in support of them, then honestly, how can we tell you as a state that we know better on how to care for your children versus the greater measure? It's a balancing act, and it's a very difficult one.
So earlier we were asked one of the biggest issues that we'll deal with. This will be one of the biggest issues because there will be a lot of time and conversation spent on this. And I appreciate how the senator framed this. What I've said to someone is, there's a lot of conversation to be had across the spectrum on this, on a scientific level, on an emotional level, on a spiritual level, on a philosophical level. But in the end, there are two buttons on our desk, one green and one red. The difference that I would suggest I have in terms of Senator Hwang's perspective, and I agree, there's a balancing act here, and this is not a vote that I will take lightly. And I don't know exactly how the bill will get written. As Representative Devlin said, that's really important in terms of the conversation. But an individual's right to choose is absolutely critical in terms of reproductive rights. I share Senator Hwang's position. The difference with this issue is there's a public health factor, and I will continue to weigh the public health factor piece of this. I have engaged in some conversations with folks. I'm very open to dialogue and listening to what people have to say. But when I look, and I'm not equating what's happened with measles in the United States, I'm going to repeat this. I am not equating what's happened with measles in the United States with what's happening in China. But what I am saying is, from a public health perspective, and specifically when you look at measles and how measles is spread, that those kinds of things are a concern to me. So at this point, I also think that for some people there is a religious exemption. For others, it's really more of a philosophical exemption. So I tend to be more on the side of the public health factor, and in that regard would be more interested in going a different direction than Senator Hwang on that.
Cristin, could I send you information? Would you be open to
absolutely.
public health information regarding this?
I've had at least an hour-long meeting with one constituent, and I'm always willing to hear what people have to say and to take in information as time allows.
All right, we have like 3 minutes left. Do we have a short question that we can get to and have a...
I was thinking, am I getting off the hook on the vaccination question?
I think it was
a question to this topic today. Please answer this thoroughly.
Right. So from a high level, I do think it's a balancing act. I have concern about the number of people who are applying for the exemption growing, and I also have a concern about the fact that the list of mandated vaccines is growing. I think everyone should vaccinate their kids, full stop. But I also, I have concerns about, for example, I have a daughter and a son. I'm going to get them the HPV vaccination. Do I think that you should be kept out of school if you chose not to get that vaccination? So it's life or death vaccinations, okay. But so I think there needs to be greater dialogue, but I respect religious freedoms. I am a limited government person, so I err on keeping that exemption, but I also have concerns about the number of people who are taking that exemption seems to grow and grow and grow.
I don't have a black and white answer for you. So when I met with several people over the last session when we were talking about this, on one hand, I totally support the ability to choose what's right for your child, but the list of vaccines, it was astounding to me. I would really like to talk to some pediatricians and also understand that because it's ridiculous. Now, maybe measles, mumps, rubella. Now, my kids are all vaccinated, and coming from a science pharmaceutical background, I support that. But this list is outrageous. So I definitely have more to understand and to learn. You can send me whatever you want. I have a constituent in town who I'm delayed on a meeting with, and she's going to be filling me in too. But there's got to be, a middle road may not be what you want to hear, but it's crazy what parents are being asked to do.
I mean, part of it too, also with the vaccines, like we did the Dr. Sears approach, which is kind of spreading out some of them, the same time period, but spreading out so it's maybe not 4 or 5 in one shot, coming back twice in a week. So I get this concern as a parent. I do.
Thank you.
Shouldn't be kicked out of school. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there, Marissa Ringel. I live on Hulls Highway. I'm also a RTM member, District 10. Thank you all for serving. Congratulations, Representative Farnen. Thank you, League of Women Voters, for having us. I'd like to raise an issue and then ask the committee if there's an opportunity to do something about it this session, and that is the increasing break-ins with cars and at homes that we're seeing in Fairfield. I personally have been, I had my car stolen, and I was told by the Fairfield police that it will be recovered. It'll probably be recovered in Waterbury. The kids are coming into town in the middle of the night and taking the cars out for joyrides. And my car was recovered totaled. It had bullet holes in it. And there has been other people off of the ramps at exit 19 that had this done to them also. My cousin had her car stolen. We met with the town police, and they put increased surveillance on our neighborhood, and it seemed to have gone down in our neighborhood, but we received emails on the RTM this week that it is increased in Osborne Hill area. in other areas of town, the break-ins and the seeing if doors are opened, and that's putting, in addition to the other problems that we have in Fairfield with the waste pile corrosion and the overtaxing. I just think it's helping to put a bad reputation on our town, and I'm concerned. When you talk to the police department, they're saying it's a legislative issue because their hands are tied. They're catching minors, and they have to. It goes through the judiciary process, and then they release them. So there's no serious consequences that are going on for the minors, and there's repeat offenders. You could read the articles in the state about repeat offenders. The same kids that are caught in New Canaan stealing cars are caught again in other areas of town. So I'm looking for more consequence for the groups the gangs that are doing this. I think kids need a second chance, and but I think that we've gone out of control, and I'd love to see heavy community service come down on these kids.
Let me give you a quick update. This is a concern that's existed throughout the entire state, but I know, having attended RTM leader meetings in District 10 and recently at Stratfield School, it's an issue, but it's a two-part issue. One is that residents need to take proactive action. You need to lock your doors. You need to lock your cars. You need to be sure that you've taken every precaution. And in those cases, when those precautions are in vain, we have addressed in a legislative issue that didn't get a lot of press and visibility is this past year, we made a significant change in juvenile justice reform legislation. And what we did this year was to take a look at habitual offenders, individuals that kind of laugh at current juvenile detention legislation and incarceration and say, you can't touch me. You've sensed some of that. So what we did was not to single out juveniles, but to create a pathway for rehabilitation support. So rather than just simply saying a slap on the wrist in detention and you're out in 30 days, we have looked at it at habitual offenders on a three-strike basis, so to speak, to be able to have real concerted rehabilitation support. As a strong advocate of reentry, the idea of being able to provide funding for individuals that have been, and particularly our youth offenders, and even any offenders that have been formerly incarcerated, the support mechanism is not there for them to not get into that pattern of behavior. So I applaud the governor. I was just with him yesterday in regards to his prevention partnership. We have to provide pathways for those that are incarcerated, that have made mistakes, to be able to have support and services to get out of that pattern of crime, patterns of poverty, patterns of bad behavior. So it's a two-pronged approach that we as a community have to take proactive protection against our safety and lock and security, but also on a legislative side, we did do something this year, but it still needs to continue ultimately in recognizing that we need to give people who make mistakes a chance for rehabilitation and support.
And I'd just like to add, to echo a bit of what Senator Hwang said, you know, sometimes we look at consequences and we think that that will be effective going forward, and sometimes the consequences we use aren't effective. What we don't want is people continuing to do this. So I'm a social worker. We want to look at evidence-based practice, and some of the pieces that have been put into place with the juvenile justice reform are based on exactly that, evidence-based practice. I will put in a commercial for Fairfield's Juvenile Review Board. Riney Noor's in the back. She's with Fairfield Cares, but she's also someone who serves on that Juvenile Review Board for our Fairfield juveniles who are in situations like that. We're looking at restorative justice practices, those that exactly what Senator Hwang is referring to, that will help assure that these young people are not back out. But just on a practical level, I agree the continuing conversation with the police department. We did have a great meeting at Stratfield the other night, and that ongoing conversation is going to be really important, and for us to continue to hear from them too. So thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you. I know we're over time, but if the legislators can stay a little bit, I'd like to see if we could finish the people that were in line.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I appreciate your patience.
Well, my name's John Burke. I live in Wilton. I'm a graduate of Fairfield University School of Engineering. I was happy to come back today. Have a few memories coming back, but I'll try to make this brief. My question is in regards to the 5G infrastructure that's being implemented on state property. It's come to light recently for cell phones and devices, faster communication speeds. We've probably all seen the advertisements. There's a lot of money being put into it and a lot of money to be made for the cell phone companies. But the difference with this, among other things, is that these transmitters are being placed on telephone poles in our local neighborhoods. It's not just a tower up in the mountains anymore. And there's significant concerns of the radiation that is emitted from these transmitters. And there's been very little, as far as I can see, scientific research or credence to scientific research before this is placed in all of the Connecticut neighborhoods as to what the health risks are of the radiation. So I was wondering if this issue came to any of your desks, or if you've seen. I know a year ago it was talked about, and then there wasn't much talk, and now I'm actually seeing the telephone companies going around putting these on the poles, and I'm kind of concerned. Has this issue come across your desk?
So I'll jump in and start. Only one legislator voted against the 5G bill that we had last session in the entire General Assembly in both chambers. Since that time, that same legislator has brought forward some health concerns, and he happens to serve as a member of the committee I chair, which is Planning and Development. So yes, it's coming across my desk. And yes, I will be engaging in conversations, much like what Representative Devlin said about the vaccines and wanting to get information from pediatricians on that side of the issue. That's my approach to addressing this issue. Is I'm certainly going to be listening to the concerns, but I also am going to listen to other folks who are experts in the field and have experience with 5G technology. Senator Hwang earlier referred to this device. I call this my other brain. And a lot of us now, not just personally, but our business, we were talking about elections earlier and security. Our world is all about those connections, whether we like it or not. And so 5G is one of the ways that we are going to help grow our economy. And I, for one, am going to be in the position of learning more about the issue, about the concerns people have, and seeing if there are valid concerns, what we can do to address them. But I can say I really support the use of technology to help us to create a better world, and recognize that we've got to address issues if they are valid issues that exist.
Yeah, it gets to a point though where it's unnecessary. In my opinion, it becomes unnecessary. At what cost to have such fast download speeds? People are the cancer rates are skyrocketing. Have to consider both sides of it.
And Bales?
So I would just jump in and say that I have had a constituent who was a mother, but actually she's an Easton resident, but is a mother of one of my son's friends, and has shared some information with me. And I know the governor just cut a deal with AT&T so for implementing 5G on our trains. So if you're an AT&T customer, you'll have access to that. May or may not have to pay for the service, but just for that group of phone owners. It is a complex issue, no doubt about it. It's going to come up, and I need to learn more about it.
Yeah, same thing. I've been basically following it for about a month. I'll give a shout out to Catch a Healthy Habit, a local place, a great place in town, and I know the owner. So, I mean, I'll be speaking to them. They're obviously representing, I think, a kind of a similar perspective that you have, but I also understand that we got to bring our economy forward in technology, and what is pseudoscience from real science, and so I'm going to continue to just try to learn more.
All right,
thank you.
Thank you. And our last question of the day. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alith Fatherly. So my family and I, my husband and we have 2 small children. We moved here to Fairfield about 10 years ago. And I'm new to this type of platform. I was a stay-at-home mom for a while, and then I went back to school, went to Sacred Heart, and did my master's in human resource management. So I have a background as a gemologist and human resource management, and also I now do financial planning. Go figure. Anyway, so I wanted to, I heard a lot today, and I really appreciate a lot of what I heard about legislature and policies and so forth, but I wanted to speak more to the soul of all of us in here, and just to talk a little bit more about things like mindfulness. And one of my concerns are basically about the spike in rhetoric and hate crimes nationwide. And I was just wondering if any of you are working on or thinking about supporting any initiatives that support mindfulness and upholding our moral standards as a community. Are you engaged in any initiatives that support any of that?
I could be very quick, and I respect your time. Thank you. That's a very thoughtful question. Look, as an immigrant, as a minority, as an individual that is very proud of my heritage, and Happy Lunar New Year to everybody, it is part of the expression of being involved, part of the representative on the circle of our Senate to have an Asian American sit there. So part of it is the active participation. I think the other part is the mindfulness that you can have dialogue, you can have debate, and not simply just go to a corner and not have that open discussion. We move so far from that. You can agree to disagree. I think we move so far from that. But I think ultimately it is an awareness, as you talk about, from a federal level down to the state level, down to the local level, down to your neighborhood level, that disagreement is not a bad thing. But there should never be a position where you stop talking to each other, where you go to your corner. So I think we have moved in a dialogue. Look, nobody is perfect. We can have passionate engagement. But saying that, we must continue that engagement and not simply go to our corner. So for what we've done in diversity in our legislation, we've talked about anti-hate crime and creating punishments for anti-hate crimes that is most penal, one of the most penal in this country. And the key is to raise awareness, to let people know that we're going to punish you and that these kind of hate is not tolerable. There's a difference between hate and emotional dialogue, and we have to understand that and be able to facilitate that and channel it properly.
I'm so thrilled that you are the last person standing here to ask this question. It's such a wonderful way for us to end this conversation. I believe that my most important job as a legislator is to make connections, and to make connections between business and government, between individuals who have very different ideas. And we make that connection by being able to listen to one another. And that is how, if you look at how the brain works, fight or flight means you can't use your skills. You can't use what is inside that amazing brain to be able to solve the problems we need to solve. And I think that how we treat one another and how we talk to one another impacts where we get as a society, and it's critical. Specifically to your question about any initiatives for mindfulness, I actually am scheduling a call with someone from Copper Beach Institute in West Hartford. I'd encourage you all to check them out, little commercial, to help bring some mindfulness work possibly to the legislature or to folks who are involved and engaged, because I think that the more we can be mindful, the more we will have space to help create that dialogue. And secondly, back to the Social Emotional Learning Collaborative group that's been meeting at the Capitol. In the last meeting, we actually had a presentation from a superintendent in Westbrook, Connecticut, about this social emotional learning model policy. And mindfulness is one of the types of strategies that districts are using, and I know we are here in our classrooms, to help students to be able to be more present, to be able to hold those emotions so that they can learn, engage, and be productive members of society. I think that mindfulness is a really important tool. There's actually great public health research out of, I believe it's UMass, that talks about how critical that is. So I'm going to continue to advocate. Again, sometimes people think that those things aren't the important things, but they're really, really critical to how we function as a society, and certainly to how we support our students in being able to cope.
Yeah, it is a good question to end on. And I am proud of the anti-hate laws that we have in Connecticut. And the reason why these anti-hate crime laws are so important, because when someone does something to another individual based on race, color, religion, it doesn't just impact that individual, it impacts the entire society. And that's why we need to have these laws to protect not just that individual, but just the chilling effect that it could have on society in people of a particular race or creed or religion. So I'm very proud of that. Unfortunately, we can't legislate civility, but what we can do is lead by example. And what I would like to do, and I hope the voters call us for this, is act with a certain level of civility. And there's obviously a lot going on in our nation capital right now, and I think it's incumbent upon us to be adults and to treat each other with respect and to listen to each other. So thanks for the question, and it was a good way to end the day.
I think potentially the only things I could add to that are that at least, in the legislature, we do treat each other with respect. And you have to build relationships and work together. So and find ways of where you agree. And I don't see that necessarily in all aspects of our community, certainly in all aspects of our politics, particularly at a local level. And one thing I think maybe that hasn't been mentioned is the importance of truth and transparency in terms of what we are doing as legislators. I talked about the spin. I talked about leaving things out. Lay it out there, and let's be open with the public. I think that is so important, both for trust and to stop misinformation and confusion or intentionally creating divisiveness. So thank you for your question very much.
You're welcome.
All right, first I'd like to thank all of you for attending today and participating. I think it was a great turnout and really appreciate that. And I'd like to really commend our legislators for being here and sharing so much information and being part of our community. Thank you.